Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Rob Unscripted. I am Rob Cohee, Industry Solution Evangelist for Autodesk, and I'm not a fan of shaving, as you can tell, and I didn't really feel like putting anything else on other than my comfy clothes. But I still need to get a video out. A lot of you are asking me about some of the fundamentals of part modeling, just some basic stuff. Can you get back to some basics? And absolutely, because I feel it's really, really important for everybody, to hone their skills by practicing. Because, hold on a second.
I'm supposed to be the franchise player, and we're in here talking about practice.
Yes, practice.
But we talking about practice, man.
Yeah, dude, practice is important. Yes, it'll make your teammates better. Because, and not only your teammates, but of course, your own skills, right? And what'll happen is you'll get to the big game, maybe even the playoffs, right?
What's that? Playoffs? Don't talk about it. Playoffs?
Yes, playoff.
You kidding me? Playoffs?
Anyway, check out this video. Like I said, it's all about basics and fundamentals of modeling. Hope you dig it. We'll see you later. Yes, before you even ask, I am here to entertain myself. So anyway, let's start a new part. What you'll do is I'm going to go to the new part file, and there's lots of different templates to choose from. I'm going to choose a millimeter part. And like I said many times before, I have my parts set up to where it actually prompts me to select the work plane that I want to start sketching on. And underneath the origin, we give you all the work planes that you need to start your part, as well as the axis and a center point. Now, once I start sketching out, it automatically projects that center point forward. So when I start sketching out my lines, I have a reference point to 0, 0, and that's really important for me because I want to make sure that I know where I'm at in reference to the origin. So as I'm sketching out, of course, it's giving me horizontal, perpendicular, and parallel constraints as I'm sketching out, but it won't do all of them automatically. It does a pretty good job of doing most of them, but I want to do a couple equal constraints and a tangent constraint here. So right on the sketch ribbon panel, you have access to your 2D constraints, and now I'm getting the geometry to behave the way I want it to behave. So let's place a couple dimensions, and by placing that equal constraint there, you'll see that 2 millimeter is equal down to the bottom one, just as designed, just as planned. So here I wanted an align dimension. If you want an align dimension while you're placing it, just simply right-click your mouse and the context menu will come up and you'll choose aligned. All of those were done with one command, one dimension command. So even though there was a vertical, horizontal, aligned, and radial dimension, it was all done with one command. So you don't have to bounce around with a bunch of commands. So once you have the initial geometry all sketched out, go ahead and finish your sketch, and then Inventor's going to display a different set of tools. Here I'm using the extrude command. So a couple different ways to do it: forward, backward, mid-plane. Here I wanted to do a mid-plane because my next feature is also going to be sketched on that initial plane. Now I've cut away the graphics by hitting F7 on your keyboard. So when you're sketching on something that's kind of cutting through your part, hit F7 and it'll do what's called a slice graphics. And I've also done a project to geometry, or those two top lines. So I don't want to guess where this is. I want to actually project that geometry forward so that when I'm placing this geometry for the next feature, it is the actual edges of the part, so it's not a guessing game. You're not zooming in real close and making it look on the edge. It is on the edge. So I've sketched out that profile. Next thing I want to do is revolve that around. Now when you hit the revolve, it's going to find any closed profiles that you have. If you have multiple closed profiles, it'll ask you which ones you want. Pick an axis and it'll revolve around it. Now that actual radius was too big for my design, so rather than undoing, the nice thing about parametric modeling is you can always go back into that initial sketch and change the parameters. Or you can always bring up the parameter dialog box and begin to add some additional levels of detail to it. So here I'm adding a reference to a height, so that part height was 15 millimeters. And then here I'm just saying that that particular dimension was where what I wanted to name it. It's so small on my screen that I can't read it, which is why I'm pausing. Anyway, so now that I have that geometry revolved around there, I'm going to go ahead and place a hole. Now the hole is kind of a hybrid. it can be both a placed and a sketch feature, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. But here, I started a sketch, tell it where it was, and now I'm going to reference that body diameter, I can read it this time, parameter, and make an equation out of it. So rather than it being just a static 6 millimeters or 5.5 millimeters, I want it to be something specific. Now the next feature I'm going to place on here is a placed feature, and what I mean by a placed feature is it doesn't require a sketch in order for you to put it on the geometry, but it does require first a solid body for you to do it. So that's why it's called the placed feature. And this time I did a fillet, and I'll go ahead and add a chamfer as well. So, you know, both of those placed features just required an edge for you to be able to execute on. Now, next I'm going to go ahead and add a hole. As I mentioned before, a hole is a hybrid. It can be both a sketched placed feature and a placed feature, or sketched base and a placed feature. I'm tripping on my tongue here already. So here, I didn't have a sketch, but I had a piece of geometry that I can reference. So I wanted it to be on a surface concentric to an existing round. And in this case, I want to add some more levels of detail to it, some additional intelligence. I want it to be a clearance hole for a specific type of bolt that's ultimately going to go through there. I didn't know what the diameter of that hole was, but Inventor's got that information built into it. And you can just tell it what type of hole that's going to be, and it'll bring in the geometry for you. Alright. Now, again, going back to some parametric model, I've got some freedom built into here, but you can always go back and make modifications to it at any point in time. So if I decided I want to lengthen that out, again, it's automatically updating the model and all the relationships that I built in. It was a concentric hole, right? So it followed that center point for that round when I made the change. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to create another sketch on that top surface. I'm no longer sketching on the origin planes. I'm sketching on a specific surface. Because what I want to do here is I want to go and I want to create a lightweight cutout. I need to remove some material there because it's just, there's too much material. I'm building this too heavy. So what I've done is I've done a project geometry. Project geometry, I use that feature probably more than I use the dimension feature. I really do. Because what that allows you to do is reference the actual edges of the parts and not just guess, like I mentioned before. And I'm bouncing back and forth between construction lines and regular lines, so they're just different types of line types. And when you use construction lines in your sketches, what that does is Inventor will ignore those when it comes to placing a feature. So it's a real handy tool for placement or just positioning your sketch relative to other pieces of geometry when you need geometry and a constraint won't do. So I've placed a couple more. There's a parallel constraint. There was some coincident constraints, so I can get this cutout positioned exactly where I want. And I did a couple offsets, and here I'm dimensioning what that specific offset will be. Well, rather than doing 1 millimeter all the way around as individual parameters, what I'm going to do is while I'm placing dimensions, I'm going to reference that one so that I don't have to. So that if I want to change that offset somewhere down the line, I only have to edit one parameter rather than the 4 that you see here on the screen. So I'll go ahead and extrude that, and I'm going to cut out some material here. And let's just real quick add a fillet. You've already seen me add a fillet, so I won't spend too much time here. But what I do want to point out is that you don't have to always select edges. You can change this to a loop, and it'll grab all 4 of those lines in one selection rather than clicking all one at a time. Now I've got that cut out on the top, and I've got the fillet. I want to match that same thing then on the back side of this without having to redo every single one of the features that I just did. I don't want to resketch it, and also I want it to update if I make any changes to it. So what I'll do is I'll utilize the mirror feature. Now the mirror feature, it's going to ask you what are your features and what are your mirror plane. Well, since I based my first sketch off the XY plane, that can actually be, and it was a mid-plane extrusion, I don't have to go about creating a work plane just for that feature. I can utilize some of the original ones. Now let's real quick go in here and add some additional properties to this. I want this part not only to look like but also behave. If I go to some final, into the FEA environment and perform some analysis on this, I want the material properties passed along. So let's go ahead and add the actual material properties to it. Maybe change the way it looks, add a perspective view. Hold down Shift and Control and roll your wheel back and forth to change the perspective angle. I got a pretty killer part going on right here. So that's it, man. That's basic fundamentals. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter.
You kidding me? Playoffs?